Was saying this to you, that you shouldn't debate this? Was it all of them? Was it a specific cabinet member or agency director?
You know, before I comment on that publicly, I'd really like to have a conversation with the president so I can make him aware of what we were told and by whom. But I will say that the messages we received didn't get any pushback internally from the briefers. What we were told over and over again was, look, this action was necessary. This was a bad guy. We had to do it. And we can't have division. We can't have dissension within our ranks, within our government, or else it sends the wrong signal to the Iranians. And I think that's completely wrong. They were asked repeatedly, what, if anything, would trigger the need for the administration to come back to Congress for a declaration of war or an authorization for the use of military force. At one point, I believe one of the briefers said something along the lines of, I'm sure we could think of something. But they struggled to identify anything. They were asked specifically, well, what about if you concluded, well, it's not my point to get into that here. I don't want to accidentally say anything classified. My point is, they were asked a number of hypotheticals about situations in which they might have to appropriately come and ask for authorization for Congress. Not once did they say, yes, we'd need to do it in that circumstance. At one point, one of the briefers said something like, don't worry, we'll consult you. Well, with history as our guide, consultation isn't necessarily the same thing as authorization for the use of military force. A declaration of war or an AUMF is what the Constitution requires, and drive-by notification or after-the-fact lame briefings like the one we just received aren't adequate. I still haven't had the questions answered that I came into that briefing expecting to ask. They left after 75 minutes. Now, I understand these are busy people. They've got a lot of demands on their time. They're appearing before a coordinate branch of government, a coordinate branch of government responsible for their funding, for their confirmation, for any approval of any military action they might undertake. They had to leave after 75 minutes while they're in the process of telling us that we need to be good little boys and girls and run along and not debate this in public. I find that absolutely insane. I think it's unacceptable. And so I don't know what they had in mind. I went in there hoping to get more specifics as far as the factual, legal, moral justification for what they did. I'm still undecided on that issue, in part because we never got to the details. Every time we got close, they'd say, well, we can't discuss that here because it's really sensitive. We're in a skiff. We're in a secure underground bunker where all electronic devices have to be checked at the door, and they still refuse to tell us. I find that really upsetting.
Granted, it took an illegal military strike and the possibility of an outright war to finally get some Republicans to dare speak out against Trump, and it was only 2 of them at that, but it was apparently the breaking point for Republican Senators Rand Paul and Mike Lee when they were briefed by administration officials about Trump's strike against Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani. Now, the Senate Republicans railed against a number of aspects pertaining to the briefing, but none more than the glaring absence of justification for the strike itself. Remember, the only way this strike against Soleimani was legal was if there was evidence of an imminent threat. The White House had previously failed to disclose any evidence of an imminent threat. Intelligence officials who spoke to reporters admitted that there was no evidence of an imminent threat. And now, United States senators from both parties are fuming because, lo and behold, there was no evidence given about an imminent threat. Of course, this is the administration still maintaining that the phone call that got Trump impeached was perfect, so I guess we should consider too that the words this White House uses don't actually mean anything. Now, aside from making the White House look bad, Mike Lee and Rand Paul's response has another unintended consequence. It makes the Republicans who came out praising the briefing look like the sycophants that they are. Marco Rubio took to Twitter immediately following the briefing, writing, "National security officials gave a compelling briefing to senators just now. They answered every important question. Anyone who walks out and says they aren't convinced action against Soleimani was justified is either never going to be convinced or just opposes everything Trump does." And it's ironic that Rubio brought up the idea that those who oppose the strike are just out to stick it to Trump, because the fact that 2 of Trump's allies, Mike Lee and Rand Paul, were so vocally opposed shows that in fact Rubio is the one who couldn't manage to put his glaring partisanship aside. Rubio even managed to stammer through a statement after the briefing.
Your Democratic colleagues who say they don't see what the long-term strategy is. Regardless of what has happened in the last 24, 48 hours, where do they say that they don't have evidence of what the president wants to do to solve the Iran problem over the long run?
I don't know where they're looking, because I can tell you that it's pretty apparent what the strategy is, and that is that Iran needs to abandon any sort of nuclear weapons ambitions. It needs to stop sponsoring terrorist groups, and it needs to stop developing ballistic long-range missiles. And if it does those three things...
How do you get there, I guess?
Well, I think, guys, that's one of the reasons why we have relied on economic pressure. And you saw the president outline today the hope that other nations, particularly signatories to the JCPOA, would join in that effort. I think the strike alone points to why any future Iran deal must include ballistic missiles and the sponsorship of terrorism. I think that's the strategy. It's not a very complicated one. We want Iran to act like a normal country.
Rubio actually says that any new Iran deal must include provisions for ballistic missiles, which only ever became a problem because Trump pulled out of Obama's Iran deal, which had brought peace between our countries, and then he killed their general. So for Rubio to claim that this was all worth it because there was no provisions for ballistic missiles, when Trump was the cause for ballistic missiles being used in the first place, is just beyond comprehension. And look, we've seen this playbook in the past. Before there was the quote, imminent threat from Iran, there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. A different lie, a different country, but Trump was hoping for the same outcome, that he could manipulate his way into starting a war so he can try and mirror the massive jump in approval ratings that Bush enjoyed after 9/11. He even put this strategy on full display, tweeting numerous times how he believes Obama would start a war with Iran to win re-election. This is plain, basic Psych 101 projection. The only problem with Trump's plan is that this administration is too incompetent to sell any of it to the American people without falling on their faces at every possible turn. But while days went by before the White House even managed to give their drive-by, half-baked explanation for what's looking more and more like an illegal strike, they did, however, manage to find time to push out propaganda for it. The administration released an image showing Trump and administration officials in the Situation Room during the Iran strike. And this right here is why they did it. This is why Trump set us up to go to war. This is why American and Iraqi lives were put at risk so that he could get a picture like Obama's during the raid on the bin Laden compound, because he is physically incapable of accepting the fact that his predecessor achieved anything, and yet simultaneously desperate to have achieved those things himself. So hopefully, after getting some tacit permission by Mike Lee and Rand Paul, other Republicans might finally find the courage to stand up for something, anything, as opposed to groveling at the feet of a president willing to stop at nothing to destroy what this country is supposed to represent.